John Lennon was more than just a singer. He was a voice that changed the world. But even with his message of peace and love, he had strong feelings about some bands. At the age of 40, John shocked the world when he revealed the 6 bands he truly hated. These were not small names, they were famous and respected. So why did John feel so angry toward them? What happened behind the scenes that turned love into hate? Stay with us, because the truth will surprise you, and the last name on the list is completely unexpected. Before dive into video, subscribe our channel. John Lennon's life was full of ups and downs. He became famous very young, and that fame brought both love and hate. As a member of the Beatles, he was always under pressure to perform, create, and stay perfect in the eyes of the world. But behind the music, he was struggling. He had problems with his bandmates, especially Paul McCartney. They often disagreed about music direction and leadership, which caused tension in the group. His love life also brought a lot of drama. When he fell in love with Yoko Ono, many fans and even the media blamed her for breaking up the Beatles. John was hurt by this, but he stood by Yoko no matter what. He believed in true love, even if the world was against him. He also made headlines when he said, "The Beatles are more popular than Jesus." This one sentence made many people angry. Some radio stations even stopped playing their songs. He later explained what he meant, but the damage had already been done. John also used drugs during his younger years. He talked openly about using LSD and other substances. He said he was trying to escape pain and pressure, but it led to deeper problems like depression and confusion. In the 1970s, John stepped away from music to raise his son Sean. During this time, he was also being watched by the FBI because of his peace campaigns and protest songs. He wanted a better world, but not everyone liked what he stood for. John Lennon was not perfect. He was bold, emotional, and honest, and that made him both loved and hated. His controversies were part of what made him a legend who spoke his truth, no matter the cost. Now we talk about 6 bands he disliked the most. Number 1. The Rolling Stones. John Lennon had a long and complicated relationship with the Rolling Stones, especially with their lead singer Mick Jagger. At first, the two bands were seen as friendly rivals. They performed on the same shows, hung out at the same parties, and even helped each other promote songs. But behind the smiles, John was growing more and more frustrated. He believed that the Rolling Stones were not original and that they copied almost everything the Beatles did. John once said that every time the Beatles tried something new, the Rolling Stones followed soon after. When the Beatles started making psychedelic music with bold album covers, suddenly the Rolling Stones did the same. When the Beatles began using sitars and Indian instruments, the Stones followed with their own version. John felt like they were always one step behind, just copying to stay relevant. He joked in interviews that Mick Jagger waited to see what the Beatles would do next before planning his next move. But the rivalry went beyond music. John also felt that Mick tried to compete with him personally. There were moments when Mick made fun of John's peace messages or mocked his relationship with Yoko Ono. John took it personally. He believed that Mick was not being real and only cared about fame and image. In one famous interview, John said, "Mick is a good singer, but he plays a role. He is always performing. He is not real." This feeling of betrayal stayed with John for years. Even though they shared the same world of fame and music, John felt that the Rolling Stones lacked depth and honesty. He thought they were more about looks, attitude, and business, while he and the Beatles stood for truth, change, and deeper meaning. By the age of 40, John no longer held back. He openly said he did not respect the Rolling Stones as true artists. To him, they were just a reflection of something better, a copy without soul. That is why they became one of the bands he truly disliked. Number 2. Jefferson Airplane. John Lennon never liked Jefferson Airplane, even though they were one of the most popular American rock bands during the 1960s. Their music was loud, wild, and full of psychedelic energy. While many fans loved their bold sound, John felt very different. He believed their songs were messy, without real direction or meaning. To him, it was just noise, pretending to be deep art. He once said that their music felt like a bad trip, hinting that it reminded him of confusion, not creativity. Jefferson Airplane often sang about rebellion, freedom, and political change, the same topics John cared about, but he believed they were doing it more for show than for truth. He felt their lyrics were unclear and tried too hard to be mysterious or mind-opening. John preferred music that had a strong message with real emotion behind it. To him, Jefferson Airplane lacked that real emotional connection. He felt their songs were built on weird sounds and random words, not true feelings. Another thing that bothered John was how some people compared Jefferson Airplane to the Beatles during the psychedelic era. He strongly disagreed. He thought the Beatles had deeper stories in their music, while Jefferson Airplane used too many strange effects just to stand out. John believed they were trying to look smart and different, but without true meaning. John also disliked their stage presence. He felt they were trying to look like rock stars instead of being themselves. That fake, cool attitude annoyed him. In interviews, he never mentioned them directly very often, but when he did, he made it clear he thought their musique. Ike was just noise covered in colors and smoke. For John Lennon, music had to come from the heart. It had to mean something real. Jefferson Airplane, in his eyes, failed to deliver that. Their sound, style, and message felt empty to him. That is why he quietly but firmly placed them on his list of bands he disliked, not out of hate, but because he expected more from music that claimed to change the world. Number 3. Elvis Presley. Later band setup. John Lennon grew up loving Elvis Presley. In fact, he often said that without Elvis, there would be no Beatles. Elvis was his childhood hero. His voice, his energy, and his bold style inspired John to pick up a guitar and dream big. But as John got older, he became deeply disappointed by what Elvis had become, especially in the later years of his career. What hurt John the most was not Elvis himself, but the band and style Elvis used during his Vegas year. To John, Elvis had lost his spark. The rock and roll rebel had turned into a polished, shiny stage performer with a huge band, backup singers, and over-the-top costumes. John called it plastic rock. He believed the music was no longer real. Instead of raw, emotional songs, Elvis's concerts became more about business, money, and showbiz. The powerful voice and soul that once moved the world now felt trapped under bright lights and glittery suits. John also hated how controlled Elvis seemed. His later band setup included so many people, guitarists, drummers, choirs, horns, that John felt the true voice of Elvis was lost in the crowd. The songs were slower, softer, and often lacked the energy that once defined rock and roll. To John, it felt like Elvis had been taken over by managers and money, and the music had become a product. What made it worse was that Elvis never spoke out against war or injustice, even though he had the power to do so. John used his music to fight for peace and truth, while Elvis stayed silent. That silence, along with his new music style, made John feel distant and cold toward him. By the time John was 40, he no longer saw Elvis as the hero he once loved. He saw him as someone who had been changed by the system, and the band that backed him in those years only reminded John of what was lost. That is why he included Elvis's later band in the list of music acts he hated the most. Number 4. The Monkees. John Lennon had strong opinions about the Monkees, and they were not good. From the start, he saw them as a fake band created only for a TV show, not from real passion or talent. While the Beatles had worked hard, writing their own songs, performing live, and building their name from scratch, the Monkees were cast like actors. To John, this was a joke. He once said that the Monkees were not musicians, they were just playing the part. Their instruments were often played by studio musicians. Their early songs were written by others. They acted like a band on camera, but behind the scenes, everything was carefully controlled. John felt this was an insult to real artists who poured their soul into their work. What made it worse for John was how popular the Monkees became. They had hit songs, sold-out concerts, and millions of fans, many of them young people who did not know the difference between a real band and a made-up one. John felt this was dangerous. It turned music into a product, and fans into buyers, not listeners. The music industry was becoming about looks, branding, and sales, not honesty and heart. Even though some members of the Monkees later tried to write their own songs and gain respect, John could not look past how they started. He believed they were a symbol of everything wrong with modern music: fake, polished, and empty. He once joked that comparing the Monkees to the Beatles was like comparing a comic book to real life. Deep inside, John was hurt that the world could not always tell what was real and what was not. He had worked so hard to tell the truth through music, so when a made-for-TV band like the Monkees reached the top, it felt like a betrayal. That is why John Lennon included the Monkees in the list of bands he hated, not because of jealousy, but because he believed music should come from the soul, not from a script. Number 5. The Byrds. John Lennon had mixed feelings about the Byrds, but over time his frustration turned into dislike. At first, he admired their harmonies and respected their musical talent, but as their fame grew, John started to feel that the Byrds were trying too hard to copy the Beatles, especially their early sound and look. One thing that annoyed John was how the Byrds used similar instruments like the 12-string guitar, and dressed in a style that felt very familiar. To him, it seemed like they were trying to ride on the Beatles' success rather than create something truly new. He once said in a private conversation that the Byrds were just another British-sounding American band, even though they were from California. John believed that true music came from experience, pain, and raw emotion. He thought the Byrds focused too much on imitating what was already popular instead of finding their own voice. While they had hits like Mr. Tambourine Man, John felt they did not go deep enough. Their music, in his view, lacked the soul and message that made great music timeless. Another reason for his dislike was how critics and fans often compared the Byrds to the Beatles. Some even called them America's answer to the Beatles, which John found offensive. He worked hard to create something original, and seeing another band receive praise for following a similar path felt unfair. He also felt the Byrds jumped from one trend to another, from folk rock to psychedelic to country. To John, this showed they lacked a true identity. They were chasing success, not building some. Effing real. Although John never attacked the Byrds publicly in a harsh way, those close to him knew he did not respect them as true artists. They reminded him of how fame could be used without depth, and how imitation was sometimes rewarded more than honesty. That is why John Lennon added the Byrds to his list, because he believed music should be about truth, not trend following. Number 6. Led Zeppelin. John Lennon never truly connected with Led Zeppelin, even though they were one of the most powerful and popular rock bands of their time. While millions of fans loved their heavy guitar sound and wild energy, John felt something important was missing. To him, their music was loud and full of force, but it lacked emotional depth and meaning. John believed that music should touch the heart and mind. He said songs should make people think, feel, and question the world around them. But with Led Zeppelin, he often felt overwhelmed by the noise. Their long solos, thunderous drums, and mystical lyrics seemed too much like they were trying to impress rather than express. Another thing that made John dislike Led Zeppelin was the way they handled fame. He saw them as arrogant and distant. Unlike the Beatles, who tried to connect with their fans and share personal truths, Led Zeppelin built walls around themselves. They rarely gave interviews and often acted like rock gods, untouchable and proud. John saw this as fake and unhealthy. He also disliked how some of their songs were inspired by blues artists, but were not always credited properly. John deeply respected old blues musicians and believed that taking their work without giving them credit was disrespectful. This made him feel that Led Zeppelin cared more about power and profit than fairness and truth. Even though he never spoke harshly about them in public, those who knew John said he often called Led Zeppelin's music too much sound, not enough soul. He respected their skill, but did not enjoy their message or lack of one. By age 40, John had seen many bands come and go, but for him, the ones that lasted were the ones who made people feel something real. Led Zeppelin, with all their noise and mystery, never gave him that feeling. That is why he quietly placed them on his personal list of bands he truly disliked. John Lennon was never afraid to speak his truth, even if it upset people. He believed music was more than just sound. It was a message, a feeling, a connection. The bands he disliked were not just about personal taste. They reminded him of what he felt was missing in modern music: honesty, meaning, and soul. Behind his bold words was a man who deeply cared about the power of art. He challenged the world, and sometimes even himself. In the end, John Lennon opinions were not just criticism, they were a call for something more real,